Hello and welcome to This Week in the Garden. For this week's episode, we're going to go over how to prepare your garden and prepare your soils for planting. If you missed last week's episode on how to plant a garden, whether you're choosing the right location, the right size of your garden, you can find that video and that article on our new website, and we'll have that link in the description or in the article, wherever you're reading this. Now, once you have your garden location picked out, the first thing you'll do before you prepare your soil is decide where you want your rows to go. In the previous video article, I talked about putting your rows so they run north to south. That gives you the best opportunity for sunlight in your garden, and that's a great thing to consider when figuring out which way you want your rows to go in your garden. Another important thing to consider that I didn't talk about was drainage in your yard. Now, I put my garden in an area that has very poor drainage. It's got a really heavy clay soil in the back portion along the fence, and that holds on to water. And so I wanted my rows to go perpendicular to that low area. And then I dug a trench along that back area. That allowed the water to pool in that area and not in my garden. I thought if I had that drainage ditch running this way and I had the rows going perpendicular to it, I could have those alleys fill up with water rather than my rows. And that's really important when you're considering which way to put your rows, because you don't want water in your garden. You don't want your vegetables to be underwater for more than an hour or two, or you'll get serious damage to the roots and you'll have the opportunity to get root diseases and other pathogens in your vegetables. Another thing to think about is the row spacing. The spacing that you want between your rows, or how wide are your alleys going to be. The general rule is about 18 to 24 inches apart. That gives you plenty of space for your plants to grow into the alleys if they need to, but also allows you to walk through your alleys. Now, that's just a general rule. Some plants can be closer together, others need more space. Something like watermelons or pumpkins need about 4 feet of space between their plants, and so their rows have to be much wider as well. We have a guide. Our planting guide tells you how far apart your plants need to be, and so you can use that if you want something more specific. But what I used in my garden was about 18 inches for my alleyways, and then my rows themselves were about 20 inches wide because I did mounded rows, and I'll talk about that in a few seconds. Once you have your rows and your alleys figured out, the next thing is to actually till your garden. Tilling is an important step because it breaks up the soil. It makes it really fine, and that allows the plant to have a lot of area for its roots to grow. This is a crucial step in preparing your garden. The more work that you put here, the better chance you have of having success in your garden. And that's because when you have a nice loose soil, you'll have a better chance for that water to go through evenly. That'll help you with your germination, but it'll also help you with your plant success as they grow roots. So we always recommend to till. Tilling about 6 to 10 inches is perfect, and you can do that with a tiller or with a shovel, whichever you have. Then what you're going to need to do is amend your soil depending on your soil type. Now, if you've had a garden before and this is going in that same spot, maybe you don't need to add anything to your soil. But for me, I have heavy clay soils on one end and heavy sandy soils on the other end of my yard. And so the best thing for me to do would be to add organic material to each of those sections. That helps the texture of your soil so it's not too clumpy in the clay areas or too loose in the sandy areas. And again, that just helps you to get that nice fine soil for your garden, for your plants. Once your soil has been amended and you've tilled it all together, the next thing to do is think about fertilizer. Fertilizer is important because it's the food for your plants. While they get their sugars from photosynthesis, they get things like nitrogen, phosphorus, and potassium from the soil, and that comes from your fertilizers. Now, some vegetables don't need as much as others. Things like corn are really heavy on their fertilizer requirements. But the best way to know how much you need to put down is to take a soil sample. And we've got a lot of videos on our website for how to do that. But unfortunately, this time of year, because of this pandemic, we're not doing soil samples. They're not analyzing the results because they're limited in their staff. And so the general rule is to put about 2 pounds of a fertilizer that's a 10-10-10. That means it's 10% nitrogen, 10% phosphorus, and 10% potassium. So you put down 2 to 3 pounds of that per 100 square foot of garden. And then again, mix that into your soil. You want to make sure it's tilled really finely so your plants have plenty of room for those roots to grow. The last thing that you need to do before you're ready to plant your plants is decide if you want to mound your rows or if you want to leave them just flat. And I kind of did a combination of both of these. On the far end of my garden, where I have the lowest area, the wettest area, I mounded my plants. I allowed the rows to be slightly elevated. That helped to keep them out of the water, but it also helps them drain properly. Because that's a heavy clay soil, it holds on to moisture. And so when I made the mounds, that helps the soil to dry out quicker, so those plants' roots aren't always wet. So that's something to consider. The con is that, like I said, it drains really quickly and it dries quickly. So if you have a sandy soil, you don't want to mound your rows. And that's what I did behind me in the cornfield. I mounded those rows, and it's really sandy, so that soil drains really quickly. So that would be a reason why you wouldn't want to mound your rows. And there's plenty of plants that grow well in rows that aren't mounded. Things like corn, your beans, your pumpkins, watermelons, squash, a lot of those grow well just putting them straight in soil without having them mounded. But really the most important factor is, what is your soil like? If it's a heavy clay and it's a low area of your yard, you might want to mound your rows. If it's great ground, if it's nice and level, you don't have any problems with water, you can just till it, make it nice and level, nice and flat, and plant your plants right into that. So that's all we have for today. We didn't have any questions from last week. We did have some comments, so we appreciate those. If you do have any questions, we've got a form you can fill out so you can ask us some questions. But at this point, we're going to introduce our first giveaway contest. It's going to span over the next 2 weeks. So this is coming out on May the 1st in that morning, and will go until 5 o'clock p.m. Eastern Standard Time on May the 15th. That's a Friday. So you have 2 weeks to enter this giveaway contest, and we're going to give away seed packets for your garden. Now that we've talked about planting a garden and preparing your soil, the next big step is actually planting your garden. And so we're going to give away seeds to anyone who takes a picture of their garden. And it can be a first-year garden, it can be a well-established vegetable garden, it can be a container garden, it can be like my garden here, just on regular ground, raised bed, whatever type of garden you have. Just take a picture of that, make sure that you're signed up through our Eventbrite registration for this class, and all you have to do is email me that picture and we'll send you the seeds. So that's all you have to do. We'll probably highlight some gardens and put them in a couple videos for you so that you can see what other people are doing and what other gardens look like this time of year. But we'll send you some seeds. If you have any preferences to what type of vegetables you want to grow, just include that in your email to me, and I'll send out my email to everybody who signed up through Eventbrite at a later date. So make sure that you're interested, if you're interested, to sign up for our giveaway contest. Again, it starts this Friday, May the 1st, and goes until 5 p.m. on May the 15th. And that's all we have for this week in the garden.